Alright guys, welcome back to another edition of Intuition Express. This is the channel where we discuss everything from MBTI to philosophy to psychology. Anyways guys, in this video we're going to be talking about the shadow of an INTP, and my goal in making this particular video is to explain that in an easily digestible yet articulate manner. So as a result, my video is going to be long and drawn out as they usually are, so that's why I included the table of contents at the beginning of the video, so make sure you refer to that if you get bored at a particular point or would like to learn a particular part of this subject. However, I do recommend watching all the way through because I believe learning beyond just the 4 cognitive functions of the INTP is just as important to your development and growth and understanding of the system as just learning the first 4. So the majority of you are probably familiar with the 4 leading functions of the INTP personality type, which is the introverted thinking, extroverted intuition, introverted sensing, and extroverted feeling. However, I'm going to assume that only a minority of you are aware of or willing to dive into the shadow functions and dive beyond the 4 leading functions. But if you aren't familiar with the 4 leading functions, I'd recommend checking that out in my INTP in-depth cognitive analysis video, where I dive into those 4 functions and talk about how they manifest in real life. I'll leave the link to that down in the description. So as opposed to these 4 leading functions, which I dive into in my previous video, this video will be an even deeper look into the INTP psyche, into what Carl Jung calls the shadow. So what is the shadow? Also known as the unconscious, the shadow functions, according to Jung, is the dark, unlived, repressed side of ourselves. They're essentially the uncivilized aspects of ourselves, underlying primitive, hidden motives for us as human beings that we aren't consciously aware of. They exist beyond the 4 functions that we're so used to using. We already know that we use all 8 of the functions which make up the 16 archetypes. So what happens to the other functions? Well, they slip into the shadow. So that's what the shadow is. It's our unconscious. It's what we aren't aware of. It's the 4 functions which follow the 4 functions that we prefer to use. So just as there's so much potential for growth in learning our first 4 functions, one could assume that just as much value can be taken from learning the 4 functions that we are most unfamiliar with and that we have the most distant of a relationship with. So is the shadow even such a bad thing? Well, actually a shadow isn't really a bad thing, because the shadow's ultimate goal is to protect our ego when our ego feels threatened, our ego being our first 4 function. So the shadow basically backs up each of the first 4 functions. So the first shadow function of the INTP personality type is called the opposing role, and it is in the 5th slot right after extroverted feeling, and it is the extroverted thinking. It's oppositional, paranoid, passive-aggressive, and avoidant. This is a shadow that's very hard to see within oneself, and it's really easy to project onto other people. So for the INTP, when their ego is threatened, oftentimes they will, as opposed to using introverted thinking, they will start to use extroverted thinking, because the shadow function will kick in and try to protect their introverted thinking mind, and they will start being extremely authoritative towards ones that they love, or just people in general. They can all of a sudden be super uptight about getting things done, and I want this to happen this way, you do this, you do that. They can become all of a sudden extremely controlling. So now comes the second shadow function of the INTP. It is their 6th slot, and it is called the critical parent. In the INTP's case, it is introverted intuition, so it's backing up the extroverted intuition. So introverted intuition, or NI, is concerned with what do I want? What do I want in my future, and how can I get there? How can I create a path where I can achieve an ultimate vision and achieve that goal ruthlessly, such as someone who leads by introverted intuition would, so an INFJ or an INTJ. So introverted intuition allows an individual to see a goal and follow through with that goal. So in the shadow, the critical parent is extremely critical of introverted intuition in the INTP's case. So it's very critical about what an INTP wants, what their desires are. So because of this, it makes INTPs very critical about their motives of doing things or wanting certain things, and it makes them feel really guilty when they want something. It can be something like spending money or saving up for something and actually spending their money. For some reason, because of their introverted intuition critic, they'll feel really guilty about getting what they in reality deserve. So for myself, this manifests for me. Let me know if you guys can relate. But when I was growing up, I always felt very guilty or undeserving when it came for asking for things from my parents, whether that's money or clothes or anything in general. For some reason, I just felt that my values or my desires were of less importance than theirs. And this can manifest in any single way. In relationships, if you want a certain person, oftentimes an INTP will just feel ultimately unworthy of getting that person for some reason that they can't really explain. It's just a feeling that they feel, and this is because of their NI critic. And the technical reason for this is because the INTPs, they go about their life and they see people making all of these decisions, and they look at these decisions, and lots of the time they're bad. And the INTPs, because of their third slot SI, they feel really uncomfortable going outside of their comfort zone. So NI, which is concerned with achieving goals, if they use their NI, then that means that they're put in a situation that they aren't familiar with, and that goes against their SI. And the reason that they don't want to go against their SI, or the reason that they don't want to get outside of their comfort zone, is because of their fourth slot, FE, and that is the possibility of not being accepted by others. It all comes down to the extroverted feeling, how they're perceived to others, what others think about them. A lot of the INTPs don't realize that they really do have a gift in some aspect. Because of their introverted thinking hero, they're able to dive into a subject. If they put in enough effort, they're able to do literally whatever they want, and they just lack the drive. And this is because of their NI critic. So to overcome this obstacle, what the INTP can do is, again, utilize their introverted thinking hero, because that is a superpower that a lot of personality types don't have, to logically break down and understand that the reason why they lack this drive is because you don't value yourself enough and your own desires enough. So you can create some sort of logical framework to deal with that yourself. So yeah, that's a big problem for the INTPs, and I believe it's one of the biggest factors, or one of the biggest inhibitors of their growth. They're basically stuck in a state of thinking like, I don't want the wrong thing, so I might as well just not have anything at all. And this is just extremely prevalent for a lot of areas of my life. Like especially money. It's like, I don't want to spend my money on the wrong thing, so I might as well just not buy anything at all and just keep saving and stay stagnant. I might as well not just buy this car that I've been saving up for, because, I don't actually need it. I'll come up with some reason for why I don't deserve it, or why I'm not deserving of it. Of course, you shouldn't just throw your money away. So now comes the third shadow function. This is the 7th slot, and it is called the trickster. In the INTP's case, it is the extroverted sensing. Carl Jung says, although the trickster is not really evil, it does the most atrocious things from sheer unconsciousness and unrelatedness. So this is when the INTPs are forced to become one with their environment. Usually they're very sloppy, they're very disconnected from their environment. They're always dropping things, forgetting things, losing things because they're up in here. So like when it comes to things like driving or like learning a new sport, INTPs usually are very bad initially at going into a new environment and interacting with it. However, once they do become experienced with it and they have practice with it, they can actually become very good at it because of their SI. So an INTP may start driving very poorly, they may be a terrible driver, and then become actually masters of driving because their SI remembers it and they're comfortable with it. It can also manifest by an INTP becoming completely aware about the experience of another person. This can manifest in an INTP telling the same stories over and over and over again. I've heard stories of INTPs doing that. However, I myself do not have much experience with that, but you can kind of make connections with yourself in your life. It's basically the INTPs being unaware of other people's experiences. Alright guys, so now comes the fourth and the final shadow function. It is their 8th slot, and it is the function that they're most unfamiliar with, called the demon. In the INTP's case, it is introverted feeling. And ways that strike us as evil are generally associated with the negative traits of the demon function. So because the demon shadows the function of the INTP's already inferior function, it can be thought of as the inferior function of the inferior function. So as a result, INTPs are super unfamiliar with this function. It's super foreign to them, and they can have an inability to understand or accept the opinions and basically how an introverted feeler views the world, because they just don't understand it. So that's something that you should look out for if you're an INTP. Understand that they may not just be completely stupid, and it may just be because you don't understand it because you don't have any experience with it. FI is closely tied with extroverted thinking in a way, in that it's much more clear and easy to execute, very fast, much more efficient as opposed to TI. So this can manifest sometimes when an INTP, they'll develop an idea using logic. Sometimes if they get really heated in an argument of some sort and they decide to pull out some sort of idea which they become very attached to, they can actually end up using their introverted feeling, pull ideas from their introverted feeling without actually using their introverted thinking, to where they'd normally put a lot of thought to the data that they're bringing forth in some sort of verbal altercation. So it can manifest, or it can come to life when an INTP finally decides to put their foot down and say no. Then they can use their introverted feeling. It can manifest when they lose their temper with someone, blow their lid. It can manifest when they suddenly become extremely cold and distant to another person. So anyways guys, that basically concludes the video. There's probably a lot more that I could have communicated. However, because these functions are so unconscious, they can manifest in so many different ways. It's not as easy to talk about them as it is your first 4 functions. And also, to be honest, I'm getting kind of lazy. It's 3 a.m. and I'm really tired, so I think I'm going to end the video. If you did enjoy this video, or you'd like me to make any other videos similar to this one, make sure you first suggest that in the comment section, and second, like, and third, subscribe. But yeah, that's gonna be all. I'll see you next video.